Spain, US in new accord on nuclear accident site cleanup. This topic will be important under General Studies Paper 2. Bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and/or affecting India's interests. Why recently in news? United States and Spain have reached an in-principle agreement to clean up land at Palomares site, in Spain, contaminated by plutonium radiation from undetonated US nuclear bombs. The binding cleanup deal was finalized in Madrid during US Secretary of State John Kerry official visit to Spain. Under the agreement, US will remove the soil contaminated by nuclear radiation at Palomares. What actually was happened? In January 1966, a US B-52 bomber plane carrying 4 nuclear bombs had crashed off the coast of Spain over the Mediterranean Sea. It was one of the most serious nuclear accidents of the Cold War era. The plane had crashed after it had collided with a tanker plane during mid-air refueling. Of these 4 nuclear bombs, 3 fell around Palomares and a 4th was found on the seabed. After the crash, the bombs did not detonated but highly toxic radioactive plutonium from the bombs leaked and spread over a 490-acre area of Palomares town. Under the earlier agreement which ended in 2010, US had paid $350,000 every year for tests of radioactive soil contamination in the region, as well as regular blood tests for Palomares residents. 2. NATO launches biggest Trident juncture military exercise in Italy. This topic will be important under General Studies Paper 2. Important international institutions, agencies and their structure, mandate. Why recently in news? North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has launched Trident Juncture military exercise in Italy to test the alliance's ability to respond to new security threats. It will also demonstrate NATO's capability to deal with conventional military engagements to more subtle hybrid warfare techniques and propaganda. It is the biggest military exercise conducted by Alliance in past 13 years as it has mobilized around 36,000 soldiers, sailors and airmen from more than 30 countries of NATO. Important aspects of military exercise. The operational center for the exercise is based in the Sicilian city Trapani, Italy. It will take place till early November 2015 and extend into Spain, Portugal and adjacent waters. The exercise envisions a fictitious invasion of a small alliance member by a large country, followed by creating a crisis with ethnic and religious dimensions. It also envisions threats to energy supplies and navigational freedom along with risks of terrorism and cyber attacks. Background for military exercise. Last time such large-scale military exercises were held during the Cold War era. But now they are held due to recent changes in global geopolitical scenario in Mediterranean and West Asian region. The geopolitical scenario has changed after Russia's annexation of Crimea Peninsula of Ukraine in February 2014, followed by support of eastern Ukrainian separatists and attacks against moderate rebels in Syria. About North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is an intergovernmental military alliance based on the North Atlantic Treaty which was signed on the 4th of April 1949. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created in 1949 by the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. NATO was the first peacetime military alliance the United States entered into outside of the Western Hemisphere. After the destruction of the Second World War, the nations of Europe struggled to rebuild their economies and ensure their security. 3. Maggi ban lifted in Karnataka, Gujarat. This topic will be important under General Studies Paper 2. Government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. Why recently in news? The governments of Gujarat and Karnataka have lifted the ban on Nestle India's Maggi noodles, becoming the first two states to do so. Karnataka's move would allow Nestle India to manufacture the product at its plant in the state. The company's other Maggi manufacturing plants are in Goa, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, and Uttarakhand. These developments also come at a time when the country's apex food regulator FSSAI is unlikely to challenge court-directed retests that Maggi instant noodles cleared last week. Gujarat's Food and Drug Control Agency removed the ban following the Bombay High Court's verdict removing the ban across the country. Background: the popular brand of Nestle India was banned on June 5 following a directive of the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, FSI, the central food watchdog. Some Maggi noodles samples were reportedly found to contain higher than permissible levels of monosodium glutamate. Message: Maggi noodles has been at the center of controversy since laboratory tests ordered by Uttar Pradesh food inspectors on a batch of Maggi allegedly found 8 times as much lead as permissible. Several states had banned the product since then. About monosodium glutamate. Message: it is one of the most common, naturally occurring non-essential amino acid, which is found in tomatoes, Parmesan cheese, potatoes, mushrooms, and other vegetables and fruits. In the food industry, it is used as a taste enhancer that increases the meaty, savory flavor of food. Although the U.S. Food and Drug Administration recognizes message as safe, it is considered far more harmful in India. It has long-term effects, but shows signs of discomfort among sensitive people whenever consumed. Typical message complaints include burning sensations of the mouth, head and neck headaches, weakness of the arms or legs, upset stomach, hives or other allergic type reactions with the skin. Scientists have also discovered that the compound can destroy retina and parts of the brain. It can also lead to nervous disorders and radical hormone fluctuations. 4. Developed world's climate change targets less than fair report. This topic will be important under General Studies Paper 2. Conservation, environmental pollution. Why recently in news? A recently released report by an NGO suggests that almost all developing countries, including India and China, have taken on more than their fair share of the burden through their intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs. However, the report suggests that the developed countries have taken on less than their fair share of the burden. The report assesses whether countries have taken a fair burden to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century in relation to their historical responsibilities for causing the problem and their current capacities. Important observations made by the report. The US has committed to only a fifth of its fair share, and the European Union (EU) just over a fifth in the fight against climate change through its new targets. The US compared to a fair share of reduction by 12,943 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent only intended to reduce its emissions by 2,089 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. The EU had pledged to reduce its emissions by 1,587 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent instead of a fair burden of 7,036 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. China should have reduced 3,371 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of emissions but has offered to reduce 4,888 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. India could have fairly taken a burden of reducing emissions by 54 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent but has committed to reducing it by 280 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. The report took 1850 as base year to calculate the historical emissions and to measure the reductions in absolute terms against the base year. What is the burden? According to the report, the burden is the target the countries have formally given to the United Nations, UN, to be undertaken under the Global Paris Climate Change Agreement. The target on reducing emissions, providing finance and technology is meant to be achieved between 2020 and 2030. What are INDCs? These are individual country commitments which are expected to indicate through their form and strength what shape any 2015 agreement might take. Countries across the globe have committed to create a new international climate agreement by the conclusion of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, Conference of the Parties, COP21, in Paris in December 2015. In preparation, countries have agreed to publicly outline what post-2020 climate actions they intend to take under a new international agreement, known as their Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, INDCs. The INDCs combine the top-down system of a United Nations climate agreement with bottom-up system in elements through which countries put forward their agreements in the context of their own national circumstances, capabilities and priorities, within the ambition to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions enough to keep global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. The INDCs will not only contain steps taken towards emission reductions, but also aim to address steps taken to adapt to climate change impacts, and what support the country needs or will provide to address climate change. In February 2015, Switzerland became the first nation to submit its INDC to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, later followed by the European Union.